Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. On this Christmas Eve morning, with all the newsmakers out of town, we begin with a 67-year tradition, the annual CBS News Correspondent Roundtable. Joining us this year, White House and senior foreign affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan. Ed O'Keefe covers Capitol Hill and politics for the Washington Post and is a CBS News contributor. We've asked him to fill in for Congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes, who we hope is enjoying her well-deserved break with her family. Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett, Justice and Homeland Security correspondent Jeff Pegues, and National Security correspondent David Martin is also here. We begin with a portion of an interview Margaret did with Vice President Pence late last week on a surprise trip to Afghanistan. She talked to him about the accomplishments of the first year of the Trump administration and what's ahead for 2018.
This president has rolled back federal red tape in record numbers, unleashed American energy, appointed conservative jurists to our courts, including Justice Neil Gorsuch. But to arrive at the end of the year, and thanks to President Trump's leadership, to see the Congress of the United States come together, pass the largest tax cut in American history, was deeply inspiring.
You see a toehold to get more done.
As much as we've accomplished this year, rebuilding our military, unleashing the full potential of the American economy, and passing the largest tax cut in American history, and other initiatives that this president has advanced, it's clear we're just getting started. And next year, I think you're going to see this administration move on vigorously to an agenda which will include infrastructure and welfare reform. The progress that we've made in the war against ISIS, where we've virtually crushed the ISIS caliphate, taken back its the capital of Raqqa, the fight here in Afghanistan, taking the fight directly to the enemy, the investment that we're making in our military, the growth and optimism in the American economy, I think sets the stage for tremendous growth and opportunity in security and prosperity in 2018.
How do you explain to the American people how they should understand what just happened this month with Mike Flynn pleading guilty to lying to the FBI about his contacts with the Russian ambassador, which the president said he lied not only to you about, but to the FBI, and that's why the president fired him?
We'll let the special counsel and others do their job. We're going to cooperate, but we're going to stay very focused on the job the American people elected us to do.
Can you just clarify how you understand what happened with Mike Flynn, who we'd known had lied to you? Did you know he had lied to the FBI? The president said that's what made him fire him.
I stand by everything I've said with regard to that individual and every other aspect of this. But
when he was fired, did you know he had lied to the FBI?
What I can tell you is I knew that he lied to me. And I know the president made the right decision with regard to him.
All right, Margaret, so the vice president is a fan of the job his boss is doing. Let me ask you about that trip, though. It was supposed to be part of a larger trip that the vice president was supposed to take. That part was canceled.
Well, it's interesting because that trip has been postponed until January. It was supposed to be to Jerusalem and also to Egypt, part of what had initially been planned as sort of a, look, I delivered on this promise to eventually move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and then it became a bit more of a trying to soften the blow that was very much dealt to all of the Arab world and the Palestinians. But as more and more canceled their planned meetings with the vice president, that made that trip tougher. But this bomb that was dropped in many ways with this decision on Jerusalem, the administration would say we didn't see the blowback on the security side, the risks and the threats that some had predicted. But you have to understand that symbolically, the decision on Jerusalem will continue to be a sticking point for the Arab world. It may not be the breaking point because they have broader concerns with Iran right now, but it is certainly something that the administration is not going to quickly move beyond.
Major, we heard the vice president's assessment of the year. Give us your assessment.
I think it was very revealing in the last week of this year, effectively in Washington, that the person who had the year-end wrap-up press conference was not Donald Trump, was not Speaker Paul Ryan, it was Mitch McConnell. And if you're going to look at the person singularly most responsible for the accomplishments on the domestic side for the Trump agenda,
well, good morning, everyone.
It's not Donald Trump. It's Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, who held, with the exception of one issue, health care, Republicans together on every single aspect of what the president tried to accomplish. Tax cuts were passed because McConnell held his conference together. all of the 12 circuit judges nominated and confirmed, a record for any first year of any American presidency, because Mitch McConnell held his conference together. And he got 49 votes on health care, closer than anyone probably could have under those similar circumstances. So Mitch McConnell put the bow on this year, and quite properly so. The president signs, but without McConnell, who for the very first time this last week, the president actually praised on Twitter, because it has finally gotten through to him through many people inside and outside the White House. Mr. President, forget what Steve Bannon says. You can't get anything without Mitch McConnell.
Ed, staying with Congress, you heard Mike Pence talk about infrastructure. You heard him talk about welfare reform, given what Majors laid out, but also the fact that you got a Democratic Party that doesn't want to help out this president. What do you think Congress is going to look like?
The more likely of those two is infrastructure, for sure. It was quite revealing how very quickly this week Paul Ryan tried to pivot to entitlement reform, and very quickly Mitch McConnell and Republican senators said, no way. Because remember the math. 51 to 49 is the new math starting January 3rd. Doug Jones comes to the Senate as a Democrat from Alabama. And
courtesy of Steve Bannon.
Courtesy of Steve Bannon, exactly. And cooperation is required. And the only thing that most senators right now believe could start the year off in a good way is working on some kind of plan to fund big construction projects, basically, in this country. The question, of course, as it always is, seems to be, how will you pay for that? And given that you've just slashed tax cuts, Republicans will probably turn around and suggest that entitlement reform is the way to do that in some respects. But a lot of those Republican senators and a fair number of congressional House members who are from suburban swing districts where going after Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security is an unpopular thing to do in an election year, are going to resist it.
David, the vice president said ISIS is decimated, the caliphate is gone. Is that accurate? And if so, why has this come to pass?
I think it's accurate to say that the caliphate, as it existed in Iraq and Syria, is crushed. They used to control all of northern Syria, northern Iraq, western Iraq. They're now down to a few pieces of territory along the Euphrates River in Syria. And I think the Trump administration deserves some credit for that. The weight of American airstrikes and the capabilities of American Special Operations Forces would sooner or later crush the ISIS caliphate, no matter who was in the White House. But the way that General Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, went about it was to give his commanders more authorities to make decisions in the field. So when they saw a target of opportunity, they didn't have to come all the way back through the chain of command to the White House to get approval. They just did it. And now the ISIS that once existed is almost dead. But as Secretary Mattis says over and over, they're not defeated. ISIS, the caliphate, is going to become ISIS, the movement. And its followers, we already see them in Afghanistan, Somalia, Yemen, name almost any country in North Africa. These aren't fighters who, for the most part, escaped from Iraq and Syria. These are just angry young men looking for a cause to serve.
Jeff, the vice president talked about Michael Flynn. Michael Flynn is at the heart of both the relationship with the Russians among Trump advisors, but then also the obstruction question about whether the president told the FBI director to go easy on the Flynn investigation. Where are we at the end of the year with these cluster of investigations?
Well, they're ongoing. And the question is, I know the White House is interested in this. When will it all wrap up? And it doesn't seem like there's an end in sight right now. I mean, you have Mike Flynn, who was given this plea deal. He is a figure that straddles, the transition, the campaign, and the first few weeks of the White House. So if he's cooperating with investigators, you get a clearer sense of what the investigators may be looking at least according to some of the people that I know who have worked with Mueller in the past. They know how he builds his cases. He tries to get some cooperating witnesses, which he has now with Flynn and Papadopoulos, the foreign policy advisor, who also took a plea deal. So you wrap up these witnesses, but you don't tip your hand, according to these people who've worked with Mueller, to what the main charges are going to be at the end. So that's the question. When will this end, and what are investigators trying to get out of Mike Flynn?
All right, well, we're going to take a short break now, but we'll be back in a minute with more from our panel.